Welcome back, everybody. Today's video addresses the most commonly asked question to me on my live streams ever since 7.38 dropped. And that is, BSJ, when do I buy Revenant's Brooch versus Daedalus? When I'm asked this question on live stream, I don't have all that much time to answer, and I don't want to derail the entire conversation. But if you're satisfied with the short answer, be ready to tune out of this video in about T-minus 10 to 15 seconds. What I say to them is that, well, Revenant's Brooch is cheaper, so it'll come online earlier, and it also has a magic damage crit and spell lifesteal, so it's good against high armor targets, and it synergizes well with heroes that like to buy Mjolnir, or they do a lot of spell casting with mixed damage, such as Gyrocopter and Luna. Otherwise, you'll want to go Daedalus. But today's video, if for all you Giga Chad nerds out there that would like to go balls deep in this baby, I am going to be breaking down the numbers on Brooch versus Daedalus using several different carries who commonly buy these items as examples and checking out the damage numbers versus high armor targets, high magic resistance targets. Are we considering supports? Are we considering carries? So many questions to be answered about Brooch versus Daedalus. Without further ado, let's get into this. Well, ladies and gentlemen, obviously there are variants and times in which you can buy Revenant's Brooch or Daedalus, but I have chosen to use three archetypal carries that I often see have this consideration for a crit-based item, and we're just going to be breaking it down. So we took three level 18 carries and gave them reasonable inventories for what they might buy, not guaranteed, but what they would usually buy before they go for Revenant's Brooch or Daedalus. We see Nature's Prophet with these items, we see Tiny with these items, and we see Sven with these items. Let's use this as a key point. Nature's Prophet hits for about 200 damage. We're going to assume nice round numbers. Tiny hits for about 400, a little over, but about 400. And Sven hits for, with God Strength Pop, damage steroid, about 600. So with these damage numbers in mind, let's go ahead and start with the numbers of Crystallis, because Crystallis as an item is used to be built into Revenant's Brooch and Daedalus. But then we can compare these items to Brooch and Daedalus exclusively. So we're going to pull up the numbers here. So we've pulled up the damage numbers for Crystallis, Brooch, and Daedalus respectively based on the heroes' damage numbers that we're currently seeing here. And for the sake of it, we're going to ignore procs from items like Mjolnir, MKB, that would otherwise contribute to the damage, and just purely talk about the item of I'm right-clicking with these items. And so we have a little asterisk at the bottom that mentions that Brooch, based on the numbers, you guys can do the math yourself if you would like, accounts for about 20% of its overall damage as magical, with 80% of it as physical. And that's going to be really important when we test the damage numbers against the target dummies on our screen now. Before we get into the testing, what's really important to note is that Daedalus costs 1,800 gold extra on top of Crystallis than Brooch does, right? Because both of these items require Crystallis, so the 2,000 gold is assumed. Brooch only costs an extra 1,300. That's something with the average carries farm, maybe not in Herald, but in my games, or maybe even in like Divine games, we're looking at 650 GPM. That seems reasonable. That's about 2 minutes after you finish the Crystallis. And if we're looking at the Daedalus, that's 1,800 gold on top of that. That's an extra perhaps 3 minutes, give or take. You know, between 2 to 4 minutes, depending on how good of a game you're having, that you're going to get that item. So it is important to consider the timing in which you're going to get these items, and that's something you'll have to feel out in your games. But now let's go ahead and break down the numbers based on the targets that we're looking at. We're going to start by testing all three heroes on these three dummy targets. These dummy targets have 0 armor, 20 armor, and 40 armor. What's important to note is that all these target dummies are given the base magic resistance that each hero in the game has, which is 25%. We will account for other instances of this later, but for now, we're going to start with purely armor-based. Before we add either of those two items to our inventory, let's check the damage numbers. Nature's Prophet is doing 385 DPS. We're going to go ahead and test the DPS numbers from Brooch versus Daedalus. Target dummy number 1. The Brooch levels out at approximately 525. Now we're going to test it with Daedalus. So for Daedalus, it levels out at about 745. Keep in mind, we have left Nature's Prophet in the same spot because we understand that he has an innate that changes his damage based on trees around him. And the final count is about 210 DPS with the Brooch. And we have the hyper extreme example here, where the target dummy has 6 plate mails and his ally has Vlad's plus AC for a total of 67 armor, which is netting him 80% physical resistance. About 167, 168 is what we're noticing for that one. So what we're going to see with this chart, actually, is that around 40 armor, Brooch, a cheaper item, starts to do about the same amount of damage as Daedalus. And when we go to the hyper extreme example of 80% resistance with 67 armor, we see that Brooch actually does about 10% more damage than Daedalus. So when you're looking at carries like Terrorblade, Morphling perhaps, or just DK with a lot of auras and his passive, then Brooch is going to start to have more value. And it's important to note, you have to consider, are you manning up against the enemy carry, or are you meant to be targeting supports? But if it's the carry you have in mind, these things are pretty important. Around 40 armor seems like a good baseline for knowing that Brooch is better than Daedalus in terms of damage, even though it is 2/3 the total overall price. One thing I wanted to show you guys is that Revenant Brooch will give you less damage than Crystallis, for instance, meaning you paid more money for less damage if we're looking at a high magic resistance target. So in this case, we have an enemy with pipe plus BKB. We're not going to activate the pipe, but we're also going to give them a Glimmer Cape to make it super exaggerated. So when we look at the magic resistance, we see 59% magic resistance, and we're going to have it so that physical resistance is at 0, so we have a good idea of how much this Revenant Brooch is reducing our damage. So first, let's load in the Crystallis. The DPS clocks in around 515, 520. We're going to go with 520. And when we look at Revenant Brooch on the same target, it's about 485. So you are literally losing damage by using Revenant Brooch as opposed to just having a Crystallis when we're looking at an enemy with a pipe plus Glimmer Cape. That makes sense if you're hitting a support who has Glimmer and there's an offlane hero in the fight that has pipe. This is obviously against a target with 0 armor. So when we look at their magic resistance at 59%, we want to get ourselves the 59% physical resistance as you see here. Let's do the exact same experiment. So 213 for that one, for just Crystallis, and for Brooch. Okay, and 225 for the total with Brooch. So here's the numbers we're looking at when we have a unit that has either 0 armor or the exact same amount of armor as they do magic resistance. And as you can see, because Brooch does give you a little bit more damage on the crit itself, it is going to do more damage when the equal amount of resistances is there. The key important takeaway from this is that when you have 24 armor, you are at the exact same amount of physical resistance as someone who has a Glimmer Cape, not activated, and a pipe aura on them, also not activated. So that's kind of the critical threshold in which Revenant Brooch begins to lose its impact, is if the unit is 25 armor or less, and they also have magic resistance items. So if your targets are supports, this is very important to consider whether or not Brooch even increases your damage in the first place. Let's go ahead and use Tiny against each of these targets as well. First off, with no items. Okay, looks like around 460, 465 seems to be Tiny's final total. And now with Brooch. Okay, so we see about 590 with Brooch on Tiny. And with Daedalus. And 755 for Daedalus. It's important to keep in mind that we're not going to demo all the numbers on just the armor targets, because we can just do math for calculating their physical resistances for Daedalus as well as for none of the 3 items at all. But we'll have to make sure that we test Brooch on all of them. So 312 for Brooch. Moving on to the 40 armor target. $233. And for the whopping 67 armor target. And 180 DPS. So looking at a 400 damage hero like Tiny, when we compare the Brooch versus Daedalus numbers, we see a very similar trend where Brooch actually convincingly overtakes Daedalus at the 40 armor target, and at the 67 armor target, it's looking like an extra 20% damage on top of the Daedalus. So it's an even more stark difference as we go to higher base damage heroes, presumably because that crit component plays a higher role when you have more damage. Now up to Sven. We're not going to pop the Mask of Madness for continuity on Sven here, and let's go ahead and get started. And we're looking at 750 base DPS for Sven. Okay, moving on to the Brooch. And the Brooch bumps it up to 905. Last but not least, the Daedalus. And 1165. Pretty big damage numbers here. Let's go ahead and move Sven on to the 20 armor target. And he clocks in at 543. And moving on to the 40 armor target. 369. Nice. And last but not least, the Giga Chad with 67 armor. Testing out that Brooch. 306. Okay, so we have gathered all of the data. Let's go ahead and pull it all together for you guys and just do a little analysis for ourselves about better understanding when to buy Daedalus versus Revenant's Brooch. So starting with Nature's Prophet, the 200 damage, like average carry without huge base damage or damage steroid, we're looking at the fact that right around 40 armor, Daedalus is about to be overtaken by Brooch, but not quite yet. But when we're looking at the raid boss 67 armor, then yes, we're seeing that Daedalus is clearly overtaken by Brooch by about 10%. So when we're looking at Tiny, a hero with about 400 base damage, really high base damage, we're seeing that Brooch does convincingly overtake Daedalus by about 8% when we're at 40 armor. While at 67 armor raid boss status, Brooch is clearly better than Daedalus at 20% of a greater margin. So we're looking at 10% as opposed to 20% at the highest mark. And the 40 armor is clearly the case when you have higher than 400 base damage. And when we go to Sven, we're seeing that trend continue, that the higher damage you have, the sooner Brooch is going to overtake Daedalus. As in this case, at 40 armor, it is a much larger disparity between Brooch and Daedalus. We're looking at about 10% there, maybe 12%. And when we're looking at the 67 armor, we are seeing a clear 30% higher damage mark on a hero like Sven with 600 damage from his God Strength. Before we conclude this video, we have to think of one final point, and that pertains to how the lifesteal interaction happens between Brooch and spell lifesteal, and how normal lifesteal works better with Daedalus. So it's important to consider that Revenant's Brooch, since that extra crit damage is magical, that it is not going to synergize with Satanic in regards to the lifesteal component. So we're just going to check to make sure it works that way, but intuitively it would. We're going to lower our HP. And then we are going to attack this PL and show the combat log. And show that Satanic is healing Nature's Prophet every right click for about the same amount. 30, 30, 27, 29, 29, 30, 28, 29, 30, 31. So what that means is the Revenant's Brooch is healing him with the Mjolnir procs as well as the Revenant's Brooch crit itself. But that magic damage crit does not actually benefit the Satanic. So in the late game, if you are a hero that's going to buy Satanic, then Revenant's Brooch might go down in value, or you might need to end up replacing it for a Daedalus later to better synergize if you do need that instant full HP from the Daedalus crit proc. So the next math thing to consider, if we're looking at both sustain from the Revenant's Brooch as well as Daedalus, because Daedalus is with traditional lifesteal while Revenant's Brooch is with magic damage spells, Mjolnir seems like the obvious choice. So when you are Mjolnir charged, I think that's usually when you're standing your ground, you have BKB Mjolnir on, that you will have a 20% chance to release 225 magical damage, shocking a nearby attacker and 4 additional enemies. So let's assume that you're only shocking 1 enemy, but we can also do the math for 2, 3, 4, or 5 enemies, right? That means that every 5 times that somebody attacks you, you will do 225 magic damage. So for every attack on you, 45 damage, you are then life-stealing 14% of that, which is about 1/7. So if we do the math, that's 6.5 heal per attack on you per hero surrounding you. So what does that mean, BSJ? That means that you will heal 6.5 per unit, which per attack, which if that means if there's a big illusion around you, a hero like PL, which will give you the max targets, that will be 32.5 heal per attack on you. So the conclusion from Mjolnir plus Revenant's Brooch is purely defensively. Even if you are not attacking, you will be healing 6.5 HP per attack on you per target, right? So if there's 5 targets, it'd be 32.5 per attack on you. And that means that if you're heavily against illusion heroes that don't deal all that much damage, or against summons perhaps, that you will be lifestealing a significant chunk of that. Obviously, that is before resistances, so it will be healing you less overall, but the idea is sound. That is about the amount of lifesteal that you're getting from Brooch, just from the Mjolnir shield itself, and that's not including the procs from actually attacking, as well as the crit damage from your Revenant's Brooch. So when we look at the Revenant's Brooch, how much lifesteal is it actually giving you? So it's 20% of your actual attack damage, as we talked about earlier in the video, is magic damage. So if it's 20% of magic damage, then 14% of the 20% would be about 3% of your damage per attack on average is going to be healing you. So if I'm a 200 damage hero, then I will be healing 6 damage per attack on average, ignoring magic resistances. So base magic resistance, we're looking at 4.5 HP per attack. That's basically that old neutral that just gave you 7 HP per attack, but even worse because heroes are going to have more magic resistance than base a lot of the time that you'll have this later on in the game. So I would say that the spell lifesteal is mainly relevant when it comes to the Mjolnir, as well as the abilities that you're actually using on your hero. And the biggest point is if sustain is important to you, Revenant's Brooch is nice for that. It's like a little bit of a hybrid, but the Satanic, the big hitter, is going to pair much better with Daedalus. Thank you for sitting through that with me, guys. If you made it this far, you are quite the Dota Giga Chad nerd here. And for conclusion, we're just going to look at the points that we really gathered during this video. We are seeing that when we're considering magic versus physical damage, which is important when we're considering Brooch versus Daedalus, that Pipe plus Glimmer Cape, without either of them active, is approximately the same amount of resistance as having 24 armor. So if you see a hero that has those magic resistance items, then 24 armor is going to match up against those in regards to negating the difference in the damage numbers of Daedalus versus Brooch. On the other hand, when we're looking at just base magic resistance of 25%, it's really easy to reach that with armor. It is only 6 armor. So the comparison of Brooch doing more damage if a hero has no magic resistance items, then you're looking at 6 armor or more means that Brooch is getting bonus damage from it. If we are looking at a BKB target that has no other magic resistance items, yeah, a pretty common scenario where it's a carry who has BKB, that 50% magic resistance added from BKB will put you at 62.5% resistance. If we want to look at that in armor terms, it's approximately 27 armor. So even if a enemy carry is BKB'd, which will significantly reduce the amount of damage they are taking from Revenant's Brooch, it will still give you the exact same value with 27 armor or more. So Brooch only worse against BKB targets if they have less than 27 armor, which in most cases, most carries will have that. So we've looked at all the comparisons of armor versus magic. We just have the numbers in our head. These are important thresholds. We're looking at 6 armor, 24 armor for magic resistance items, and 27 armor for BKB. And then we're also seeing that the higher your base damage is, the more Brooch will have value against higher armor targets. That can obviously be explained by the math, but it's nice to get a sense that it's not a huge difference. And it's not like some threshold where you're just going to know. I mean, nobody's going to remember 38 armor if you have 400 damage, 34 armor if you have 600 damage. Nobody's going to remember this type of stuff, right? But the important thing is these baselines of 6 armor, 24 armor, and 27 armor. And the higher your damage goes, the more important it is to penetrate armor with Revenant's Brooch as opposed to Daedalus. And the other thing we discussed is the sustain factor of both of these items. Revenant's Brooch goes fantastically with Mjolnir and these mixed damage carries like Gyrocopter, Luna, Tiny. while Satanic works much better with Daedalus because it doesn't benefit from the crit of the Revenant's Brooch, and will benefit you much more in the late game if you have Daedalus plus Satanic or Mjolnir plus Revenant's Brooch. I hope that helped answer your guys' question about Revenant's Brooch versus Daedalus. That was quite a doozy in regards to the numbers that we had to crunch there. For today's sponsor, this video has been brought to you guys by yours truly. The website that I've made. I have invested hundreds of dollars into bsjdota.com, giving you all of the latest news with Brad G. I mean, BSJ and the coaching content, the YouTube content, the personal content, the Twitch content, a monthly blog, and more. Check it out now. Hundreds of dollars, guys. Get it while it's hot. We'll be putting a lot more effort into this as well as the community. Please check it out yourselves, bsjdota.com. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments what you guys thought, if you enjoyed nerding out with me, or you just could have given the 5-second answer, BSJ. We would have taken that. Thanks so much for watching. See you guys next time.